listening to the Futures Podcast with me, Luke Robert Mason. On this episode, I speak to the co-founder of the Pirate Bay, Peter Sunde.
Human emotion and memories and connectivity and culture has a much higher value and meaning than just finance and business.
Peter shared his insights into the cultural importance of copying, why pranking and trolling is an effective form of online activism, and why civil disobedience might be our best tool to bring about a free and open internet. Now, one of the world's most infamous peer-to-peer file-sharing platforms is the Pirate Bay. Allegedly launched in 2003, it fast became the largest source for downloading feature films, TV shows, and software. For over a decade, it sparked numerous controversies pertaining to the legality of file sharing, the limits of copyright, and the issues surrounding civil liberties. But behind all of this outrage is a much more nuanced story, one of activism and political engagement driven by a desire to troll authority and to question the assumptions about what the web is, how it is operated, and how it is governed. At the heart of this is the Pirate Bay's outspoken co-founder, Peter Sunde, who has continuously found new and often hilarious ways to question reality through engaging in a hacktivism at a global scale. So Peter, hacker or pirate, activist or prankster, politician or provocateur, artist or ex-convict, how would you best describe yourself?
Like everything you just said, I think it's a mix of everything. I think it's in general, we're not binary people. We have different time slots in life for different things. So I think we need to be all of those things, and the more the merrier.
The more the merrier indeed. I mean, at the heart of everything that you do, it seems to be an interest in this idea of copying. Copying is so integral, it feels, in so many ways, in biology and society and mechanics. I mean, why is copying so integral to how we progress as a society?
Well, it's the basis for everything we do. It's like we learn by doing, we learn by copying, we learn by mimicking. We go to school to copy other people's understanding and knowledge. So we can't have a society without having copying. And in today's society, all information is digital. We have the possibility of having every copy available for everyone. So for me, it's a way of looking at how do we want to develop society? And if we want to do it more rapidly and in a more fair way, of course, copying is at the core of everything.
I mean, I want to start at the beginning because the Pirate Bay is really the story here. And how did three individuals, how did they end up creating one of the most popular destinations on the internet?
By accident, like everything else. I think we were interested in technology. Mm-hmm. We were quite a big group. We're like 40, 50 people that had different interests, but we all kind of formed together as a small, weird think tank operation called the Bureau for Piracy as sort of a reaction to the anti-pirates that were founding organizations, anti-piracy bureaus in all over Europe. Mm-hmm. So we were like somewhere between a prank, student-esque prank or organization, that very loose, playing with new technologies. And one of the things we happened to do was we found a new technology called torrents and BitTorrent, and we made a website using that mostly for the Scandinavian file sharers, which the big difference with BitTorrent and how previous file sharing worked was that you could participate in sharing in a more fair way, where you would also upload parts that you downloaded. So previously you would have to share a hard drive of 20 gigabytes of music in order to get new music. It was a very elitist system, and BitTorrent kind of changed all of that, where you wouldn't just be like someone who took from someone, who you would also like help other people in sharing. So it was very interesting on a philosophical level, but also on a technical level and on a legal level. So that's kind of what we focused on. And what happened to be is like the Pirate Bay that came out of this group started growing slowly and became a little bit bigger. And we were three people that were, let's say, more or less the people that took care of it day to day. So we split from the other group. I still stayed as a member of the first group, but we focused on most of our time on Pirate Bay. And I think we didn't have any like big vision that this is going to be extremely big or anything. Like it was just important to us on a personal level, and that's why we did it. And then everyone else started shutting down because of legal pressure, and we took a stance against kind of that bullying that these companies were doing and are still doing even to this day against the same people. So I think it was just kind of timing, luck, or maybe the opposite of luck, and just being a little bit stupid, actually, not looking at the consequences of what we were doing.
I mean, what were those early days like? How did you find your co-founders? We always have these kind of imaginaries of what groups of young individuals coming together to create a tech project look like. But what was the, I guess, culture like at the Pirate Bay back then?
It was nothing like what you would imagine. We were three individuals that had different political interests and philosophies. We did not like each other that much. We could talk about the internet. We were very much idealists when it came to freedom of speech, access to information. There was very few things that we had in common, from me being on the, as they would call it, the extreme left, and the other guys were the moderate right, or as I would call it, neo-Nazis almost. No, so it was we were very different, but we did agree upon like the basis of what became the Pirate Bay. So we could work on that. And I think in many ways, because we didn't, every time we tried to speak on other things, we started fighting. So we decided not to do that. And it was very productive in a way to just ignore those things.
For you, what was the Pirate Bay? Was it a tech project, or was there something else going on there? Were you using it as a platform for both art and perhaps even activism?
For me, it was definitely activism. It was early on hacktivism, I would say. It's using technology to leverage an ideology that I wanted to promote and have discussed. So, of course, there were the practical angle of people actually being able to reach information and sharing. But that was, for me, that was like the good thing of the system that would make them think about why they were doing this and how we wanted the world to look like. For the other guys, they had different interests in Pirate Bay, of course. Like for Fredrik, it was mostly an amazing tech project to work on as a technician, because we were running half of the internet traffic at one time, and being, we had no budget, no money, no whatsoever. We had the first server was actually, we didn't have money for the chassis of it, so it was actually in a shoebox, ran in Mexico, probably funded by some Mexican cartel. It was very different than what you would imagine a normal startup or anything like that. So it was very exciting that way. And it also made us focus very much on having the system up and running and getting people's support for doing this, because I think that was the most integral part of it for me, that if the public didn't like it and didn't use it and didn't want it, it would be, a useless product.
I mean, that was the amazing thing about the Pirate Bay and reading about your story. It's how you messed with people's expectations, because the expectation was that because it was running about 52% of the internet traffic at the time, that it was this huge, nefarious organization. And you were able to use that perception to almost troll the press and mess with some of their expectations, weren't you?
Yeah, it was. We were really good at that. I can probably take some of the blame for that as well. But yeah, every week there would be some journalist contacting us, asking to meet us at our headquarters or maybe our local offices somewhere. And of course, we had normal day jobs, all of us, and we didn't have any money. We were. Most of the times in Pirate Bay were shut down. It was not because of police, which everyone thought. It was because we had unpaid bills somewhere, and we were finding the next sucker to, make sure that he will not get money from us, because we can't afford the internet bills. But bandwidth was very expensive that time. So it was the perception was very different. And as you said, we were using that quite much to our advantage. We sent out press releases like big corporations would do, but using words that big corporations would not use. Very often words like fuck or fuck off, or fuck was the mostly used word, I would say. So that was, we used very much the form of big corporations when it fit our agenda. And when people started giving us kind of undeserved respect and attention, we didn't feel like it was something we could waste. So we started using that as well. So one of the funniest projects that we did was there's this nation or island or platform really outside of England that's called Sealand. They claim to be their own nation, and we had a discussion like that's kind of cool. We should have our own nation because who doesn't want to have their own nation? And Sealand ended up being on eBay. They actually wanted to sell Sealand, and then we started the first crowdfunding campaign on the internet ever, just called buysealand.com. Just claim that we're going to buy this country and we need your money, and that's it. And if we can't afford, we're going to do something else with the money. That's fun. And people started donating. It took like 24 hours and we had $50,000 or something like that. And all of a sudden, I remember the Prince of Sealand got invited to the Larry King talk show and talked to one of the bosses at Warner Brothers or Disney, something like that, about the problematic situation of us having our own nation and then dictating copyright laws and so on, which was, I think I was still hungover from the party we had when we came up with the idea of Sealand when I saw him on Larry King. So it was a very bizarre situation that people took us way too serious. And I think that was the best thing that we ever did, was getting that attention.
How far did that project go? Did you end up starting your own country, or did that get nipped in the bud after Larry King?
Well, Hollywood being afraid of us, they gave the guy a movie contract. So there was this really crappy movie about Sealand a few years later. He happened to get it, exactly at that time. It's probably totally unrelated. But yeah, in general, I think also we would not be good people to run our own country, at least not as a group of those three people, because it would be a really awful country to live in with those type of politics. But it was also like a really interesting debate that happened when we started talking about having our own nation, because people on the internet started realizing that there is something wrong on the internet, that we need to have our own nation in order to actually have a counterbalance to the United States having so much influence and other countries being kind of afraid of the United States and their influence when it comes to technology. That was very interesting talking about that, and also some very scary situations that arise from that, because people started applying for passports. We made our government website and people started applying for passports because they were refugees and so on. So it was like all of these deeper meanings that came to this, which is, troublesome, but also, of course, interesting on different levels.
Well, there were so many projects like this, wasn't there? You claimed to be starting a drone internet. You basically virtually invaded North Korea. I mean, what are some of your favorite ways you were trolling the press at the Pirate Bay? So,
long story. I try to keep it short, but I think the North Korea relationship is really different. So not a lot of people know this, but North Korea and Sweden has a really long history. After the Korean War, North Korea shut down, and one of the first countries they started trading with outside of Russia and China was, of course, Sweden, being a socialist country in their eyes, and also having something which they wanted, which was Volvo trucks and Saab and Scania tractors and all of these things, that they wanted to buy a lot of Swedish technology. So Sweden was the first country invited into North Korea, which was considered or thought of as probably one of the richest countries in the world, which is an absurd thought today. But North Korea was very rich before the Korean War. So Sweden got pranked, or like they got kind of screwed over by the North Korean government. So North Korea started buying things and slowly paying for them to the Swedish government, and the Swedish government started funding local companies in Sweden so that they could produce faster and give more to North Korea. And then in the end, North Korea has, they just stopped paying the bills and owed Sweden like 200 million euros or something like that. Still to this day, they haven't paid anything since the 90s or early 90s. So of course, Sweden ended up having an embassy, a North Korean embassy in Stockholm, which was actually used for smuggling cigarettes to Sweden in the 90s as well. Interesting story. But it's one of the few countries in the world, like in the Western world, that has an embassy of North Korea. And I've been kind of obsessed with the North Korean Swedish relationship and studied them quite a lot, and just out of pure interest. And I know that every time you say something about North Korea or you want to talk to North Korea, they will always say no comment. But very often when journalists started asking us for comments and we didn't want to reply, we always said something stupid. And one time I was really annoyed at a guy working for a Swedish newspaper because I've told him off so many times that I don't want to respond to your things. And I said, I don't want to respond because right now I have to go to my meeting at the North Korean embassy. And then, I replied 2 minutes later saying, oh, please ignore that. And then, of course, he didn't ignore it. And I said, I can't comment on what I just said. I just was playing along with him. And then I leaked through some other sources that we were going to make a deal with being hosted in North Korea at the embassy in Stockholm, because they also have a fiber connection there. And we would be on North Korean soil, but in Sweden. And one of the things we did with Pirate Bay was that we always made up things that were plausible, very unlikely, but technically possible. And having the reputation we do, it could actually happen. So working with the North Koreans is very plausible for us, especially at that time where people were kind of confused of who we were and where our goals were. So, of course, that was the first prank we did with North Korea, was that we claimed to be hosted at the embassy. And then when the journalists contacted them, they said, of course, no comment. And, instead of saying this is not true, which the press would kind of expect them to say this is not true and deny it. So there was, for a long time, there was rumors in the press, like the press actually wrote a lot of stories about Pirate Bay being hosted in North Korea. Then, of course, a few years later, we after that was, obviously it was people realized it was a joke. But a few years later, we kind of revisited that project, and we actually took all of North Korea's IP addresses. So we found a way to make our routers look like they were actually the routers of the North Korean country, and it was kind of a brag to show how we could hack the internet and take control over parts of the internet that was not really well protected, to show off our technical skill. But also we actually had IP addresses that were registered to North Korea, and we ran the Pirate Bay on one of those IPs. And we even delayed the traffic. So even though it came to Sweden, we had machines in front of it that delayed all of the traffic, so it would look like it was on a satellite link. And we faked the whole everything. And it took almost a week before the technologists realized how we did this. The press was all over, and North Korea they just said no comment. And then afterwards, of course, people started doing all of these memes with pictures of the three of us being in North Korea with teaching Kim Jong-un how to do internet and so on. It was very funny. And the only sucky thing is, I always say about this story, is that for a week we actually had all of the internet traffic in North Korea, so the North Koreans could not use the internet, which is sad, of course.
I mean, it feels like, Peter, you should be thanked by the international community, not vilified for some of your interventions. I mean, what is it that drives you to find these exploits and play in these spaces?
I think it's just I never stopped being a kid, and at the other hand, I think that I like pranks because they give you the attention for something else. Like you have this absurdity of, for instance, being in North Korea, which means that people will talk about the actual thing. It's really the best thing that Pirate Bay ever made was the fact that people started talking about intellectual property at all, because it's such a boring topic. So we used kind of these pranks in order to make it, I wouldn't say sexy, but funny. When you can make it sexy, you have to make it funny, right? So we were the funny people that made it interesting to talk about serious topics in a way that was more or less core discussion about what we want our next community or the current society to look like. If we're going to build it on top of a platform like the internet, we need, of course, to have democracy in place. We need to realize that we don't own the cables, we don't own the infrastructure, all of these things, and start discussing how to integrate that into actual politics, in normal everyday politics, and how to make sure that we have human rights on the internet and all of these things as well. And we did it in a very playful way. And for me, I like humor, of course. I like pranks. I love the Yes Men, all of these people that make pranks that are clever and funny. It's a very effective way to actually get your ideology across and open up a discussion. And our opponents are basically every project I go into, the opponents happen to be humorless people. So you get this kind of unfair advantage where they look like dicks, and they are mostly are dicks as well, but they look like they're what they actually are. And so you get kind of a lot of sympathies for your cause, because you pull down their trousers and see that they're just assholes, right?
Well, it does feel like just being annoying is a legitimate response, because I know when it came to some of the legal threats that you were getting, there's some of the responses to the lawyers of the companies who were sending you takedown notices. You were just trying to be annoying to sort of expose how stupid some of these requests were. So could you share some of your favorite responses to some of those lawyers in the early days?
I think back in those days when people started sending like these takedown notices, the cease and desist letters, these companies were very used to people just listening to them and then taking their word for it. But I would say 99% of the cease and desist letters that we got were from the United States, and they were talking about the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is a law in the United States saying on, dealing with how to take down websites or content on websites. That, of course, does not apply outside of the United States. And it felt really weird that they would try and apply that in a different country, even though, Europe, we have other laws that they could use, and we would, be happy to talk to them if they didn't have this kind of like, sorry to say, but this Central North American attitude of like, we are the world and we are the world police. So we wanted to take them down a notch and be annoying, but also legally right. So we just very often told them, fuck you, or here's a thing you can stick up your ass, or recommend models of batons that we told them, and confused them quite a bit. I remember one of my favorite personal responses was I got a letter from one of these big Hollywood studios about, take down this and this movie or something like that. And I just sent a picture of a polar bear. The popular myth being that polar bears roam around in the streets in Scandinavia, even though it's only on Svalbard, a Norwegian island far north. And I just sent a picture, like no text, no nothing else, just a picture of a polar bear. And I got a reply saying, why do you send a picture of a polar bear? And I said, well, this guy is outside my window. He's trying to kill me. Like, why do I care about, some American law called DMCA? It's not relevant for me, but staying alive is. So what are you going to do to help me? And of course, he didn't reply to that because, it's just stupid, right? So they very often sent documents in doc format or in BMP files or like really big image files instead of just text in a document, because they're from this, they scan some documents, right? So it's this collision of internet culture and the tech-savvy culture with the old world, very much in a document form and just the format of it. So we would, draw a cartoon or a doodle and set it back with, a penis squirting or something like that, because they did not know how to respond to that. And when they don't respond, you actually win, because they didn't follow up on their legal threat anymore, right? So we were totally in the clear because they were confused. And it's a very modern Sun Tzu kind of approach to attack back with its stupidity.
Well, it feels like it was not just stupidity that you were utilizing. It was really political theater. What you were doing was a form of politics. And I know you've been heavily involved in European politics. In fact, you ran for the European Parliament in 2014 with the Pirate Party of Finland. So why have you always had this interest in nascently getting involved in European politics? What is it you're trying to reveal by getting involved in these sorts of things?
I kind of understood as you say, theater is a really good word for what we were doing. And then I'm still what I'm doing is mostly theater in many ways. And I have sort of a role in this theater where I am some sort of prankster and a jester. It's a story, right? So it's a storytelling. And very often when you have a story, it's simple to write for the press. So it's so for instance, when I ran for office in the European Union, it's not because I like certain political parties. In general, I don't like political parties. It's too constrained for me in many ways. And I don't want to be a politician with responsibility to voters or anything like that. It doesn't work for me, really. Other people do that much better and should do it instead of me. But I realized that if I run for office, I will get attention, and I will use that attention for making sure that other politicians running the same election have to talk about the things that I want to be talked about in the media. So I could bring the discussion about the internet openness and copyright and transparency and access to information, all of like the core values of like ownership of the internet and what we want to do with it, internet as a human right, and all of these things. And I sent out really awful advertising campaigns. Like I made small videos. I was just looking into a camera romantically with, romantic smooth music, really awful. And then it just said like Peter romantic. I didn't say like, this is my politics, or I didn't say that this other party is crap. I just took a different path because I knew that it would be much more interesting to me as well, because it's some sort of artistic approach to this as well. And of course, it gave me a lot of attention, both because I had this weird background, and when the media asked me for like, well, what my main point is of running, I would say, well, I want diplomatic immunity. And that's like, if you vote for me, I get diplomatic immunity, and that would be really cool for me. And people, of course, like get shocked by that because it's interesting, it's funny, and also and then they would ask, why do you want diplomatic immunity? And then I could tell them the story about how I was wanted by Interpol at the time. And of course, I could tell a story of why, which is the Pirate Bay. And then you have this David and Goliath story. And all of a sudden, by saying one thing that sounds ridiculous, you open up for someone. You kind of invite someone over to your house and on your side of the playing field to have a discussion, which is much nicer than trying to like force someone to have this discussion.
I mean, it was absurd at the time, but we've just come through the Trump era where it felt like the only reason he was running was for diplomatic immunity. So do you think some of these absurd things have bled back into real life politics? The border between art and reality is slowly dissipating?
It's impossible to do satire today. I like the comedians working on satire there. It's impossible. Of course, I'm friends with Chris that started 4chan, one of the sweetest guys ever in the world. He's just an amazing guy. I would never expect whatever he created to create Trump and QAnon, right? It went from being this nice hobby project of 4chan that was. Everything that was great with the internet was on 4chan, like an anonymous board where people could post things and discover themselves and rediscover themselves without having any pressure of, if you post something on social media today, you will have to stand for that in 5 years, even though you're a totally different person. 4chan was the opposite. It was the beauty of the internet. And right now it's just like the cesspool of the whole world. And I think something happened very quickly, and might be that, let's say, our side that we're using the internet as a platform, trolling and all of these things, maybe our tactics were taken over by the alt-right and kind of the opponents to what we want to achieve, and did that in a much better way than we could ever do.
The memes were certainly stronger. I mean, it wasn't just politics you were involved in. You were involved in religion, which was one of the oddest things that I read about you. In fact, you founded your own religion, the Missionary Church of Copy Me-ism. So what was the story behind the Church of Copy Me-ism?
So, again, going back to my idea of like, taking things differently, we had an opponent in the anti-pirate world, which a lawyer that realized that calling us pirates didn't really work, because we kind of reclaimed that word from being something bad and into something that had a positive spin. People were very proud, and a lot of people are still proud of being a pirate, depending on what you put in the meaning. So the Hollywood studios, music studios, when they said someone was a pirate, it had no effect. So this woman specifically, she started every single interview, she said that we're a cult, like we're a cult. Right? And we had this fun word, which was copy me, which in Swedish means just to copy me, of course. And we put that as a logo on everything. Instead of copyright, it was copy me. And we made like a pyramid with a K inside instead of a round symbol with a C inside, as some sort of alternative to copyright that we wanted to be copied. And then when she started calling us a cult, I started, looking into, okay, so can we kind of reclaim that word? Can we be a cult and make it something funny? And, I'm Norwegian Finnish. I grew up in most of Scandinavia. And one of the big differences between the Scandinavian countries, one of the major differences with Sweden is that Sweden split the state church in like 2000, I think. So Sweden is one of few countries in Scandinavia that does not have a state church. By doing that, they made the most liberal and modern law about religions in the Western world, whereas you can believe whatever and you can be recognized as a religion if you have a certain format is fixed. So you need to have some sort of Bible, you need to have some sort of way to do prayers and so on. And Sweden being a social democracy, somewhat still, you would pay 50 euros to register a religion that would be recognized by the state if they just liked the format of it, because they could, of course, not comment on the content because then it would not be very open. So I had some friends that thought it was a funny idea, and I was playing around, like reading all of these things, and I just liked the idea of having my own church. And then I realized that in most of the laws about surveillance, like the Data Retention Directive, or in Sweden there's the FRA, which is the Swedish NSA that had a new law coming that was listening into traffic and between borders. All of these surveillance laws are really afraid of, let's say, the religious lobbying. So there's always an exception to religious communication in all of the surveillance laws, which is ironic because most of what they're after is, of course, jihadists or someone who is a religious terrorist, but you're really not allowed to listen into that traffic. So I realized that basically, if you talk to your priest, that is a religious communication. And there's this church called the Church of Mormons, the Mormon Church, and they consider everyone being a priest. So you can go and talk to anyone else in order to lighten your heart and talk to God. So I just decided we could do the same. Everyone can be a priest until proven otherwise. And then instead of having peer-to-peer traffic, we would have priest-to-priest traffic, still P2P. But if someone filed a lawsuit against you for file sharing, you can say it's my religious beliefs, and copying is the actual service that you do. It's your way of talking to God. And then it would be 4 years in prison for the person who actually looked over your traffic and discovered that you were doing your prayer. So it was just a funny, of course, it would be absurd in a case of law, in a court case, to say that this is religious. But it would be plausible. It would be probably hard to not take that seriously as a lawyer, as a judge, because it will reflect on so many other things. So we had this priest-to-priest communication, and then it was just a matter of getting the church registered, and it was just super funny. And it also took away this whole discussion from the other side that we were a cult. And the interesting thing, of course, is that this woman who started with this cult, she works for Hollywood and the Church of Scientology. So she would have, of course, this understanding of why being a cult is bad, right? So, but it was also one of my favorite things that happened with the church afterwards, because we opened it up for registrations and you could become a member and so on, just as a fun thing. And tens of thousands of people signed up. My favorite moment, or least favorite moment, was I went to a really amazing festival in Belgrade in Serbia. I was there with one of the other guys. There was the co-pope, or whatever you want to call it, of the church. And there was this guy that came up to us and asked if we would wed him and his girlfriend, because they wanted to be the first couple ever married in the Church of Copyism. And I had to explain that I don't believe in marriage. And my friend explained that he's actually Christian and of another faith, so he didn't want to do it. And they still asked us, what should we do? And I just saw Austin Powers the day before, so I was still in this mindset of lasers. So I just told him, you need lasers, which Austin Powers says in his movie, very funnily. And then the day after at the festival, there was a wedding. The guy got married, and they had a Guy Fawkes mask. The priest had a Guy Fawkes mask on, and they had some computer speech with all of the wows. And then they had 40 people with laser pens in the audience, shooting lasers. And it was, funny and also a little bit scary. So I talked to the guy afterwards. I said, congratulations and all of that. And I wanted to make sure that he realized that this was kind of a political prank. And I just said, you do realize this, right? And he looked really seriously straight into my face and said, Peter, you're just testing my faith. So maybe it was a cult, which is kind of funny. So I just started laughing because it was kind of scary and funny at the same time. And it's on my bucket list. I have a long bucket list that's getting shorter by the minute because, I do some of these things. But starting your own cult is kind of a cool thing to have done.
Well, what's crazy is it seems like the only way to get true privacy in this day and age, in a post-theist world, is to be part of a religion. That reveals something very problematic about the world in which we're living in.
Yeah, but everything is a religion. Like the current regime we're living in, we call it political, but it is sort of a religion. Like capitalism is religion, socialism is sort of a religion, but we're living in one of them. And I don't have that faith. I'm not even agnostic. I'm very much don't have a faith of capitalism. So this is the problematic thing, is that we have a conviction rather than an understanding of society. And it leads to quite problematic situations when we can't see kind of what's good for us in the long run. And this is typically the problem with religions, is that it's not based on facts or science. It's based on a belief or hope, which could be good if were also kind of based on actual facts.
I mean, the interesting thing about the religion is you developed the entire aesthetic of the thing. Apparently, your religious symbols were Control plus C and Control plus V. I mean, what other aspects of the religion did you enjoy creating?
Well, I very much like the discourse around religions as a sort of a political experiment. A lot of people were really upset about us starting a religion because they are true followers of some god, and said we were kind of abusing the power invested into people, like, which I can understand. Like, a lot of people have had troubles, quite a lot of troubles because of religious convictions. And then we show up as some sort of political prank, abusing kind of the thing they've built up on some sort of recognition and respect for. Then again, I think a lot of religions are sort of political to begin with. Many of them have been used as political tools. There's a reason why the UK head of state is also the head of the church. All of these things are intertwined. It's more of a culture than a religion or politics, maybe. And for me, it's important that we question these things and that we have respect for them, of course. But I think it's okay to use whatever tool you have if the reason of doing it is the right reason, right? So if you have a conviction that you're doing it for the right reason, I'm fine with it. But it was really more interesting when people internally in the church that started kind of breaking it up into pieces. Like, these are the things I can stand behind. There was fractions or in of the church, what happens in every religion. We just call them forks because we're tech people and we fork things. So there was, the anti-orthodox copymism church and all of these kind of funny different layers that happen and with these fractions, which was, it's sort of like you set something on fire a little bit, and then it starts burning this thing and this thing that you didn't know would actually burn, and like feeling like a pyromaniac that was just like looking at something burn, and was kind of funny. But it's this unexpected outcome, like with the religion having people getting married. I would never expected that, but it was funny. I always like to play again with these plausible things. Another funny or sad thing I've been doing, which is not so much related to the internet or copying, but like every other country in Europe, both Sweden and Finland, where I'm mostly active, have had a lot of trouble with the far right extremist parties joining kind of the political discourse as some sort of equal, which is scary and problematic. So I actually, with some friends, we decided to start a true nationalist party in Sweden and in Finland, because we have indigenous people here called the Sami, which a lot of people don't know about, but they are the true Swedish, Norwegian, Finnish inhabitants to begin with, like from 20,000 years before the current Swedes or Finns came to this country. So we just decided so if we're going to have nationalist parties, then let's go extreme. Let's take the real nationalists, and because they're super nice people, they would never do it themselves, but let's just pretend to be those guys. And then we start instead of the Swedish Democrats, we had the Sami Democrats, and instead of like the true Finns, we had the true Samis. We copied their wordings, and we copied their debate articles and their political programs, and we added some Hitler, and we added some, all of these other things. And we started talking about this Middle Eastern culture that were coming here, and then, but we meant Christianity rather than Islam. And we talked about like these Swedes and these Finns moving into our countries, taking our women, taking our jobs, taking, all of our mines and all of these things, which is kind of exactly the same story that's going on right now, but it just happened before. Yeah. And it was very interesting seeing how the especially the fascists and neo-Nazis were reacting to this, because a lot of them agreed that, okay, so these guys were here before us. We took their, we took their jobs, we took their mines. This is all true. And now we took their land. And they just said, fuck them, we don't care. Some of them said, okay, we have to move back to like Belgium or France or wherever our parents came from, 10 generations ago, because they were true to their ideology. But for them, it was a wake-up call when you had a much more extreme party that came there that made equal amount of sense. And the press was really upset because they also didn't figure out until like 2 months afterwards that this was a prank. So yeah, it made everyone feel stupid, but most of all, it made the Swedish and Democrats and the true Finns feel quite stupid because they fell for it, and it was kind of funny. Then again, there was this other thing. Again, as with the church, we opened up memberships, and a lot of people signed up. And for me, it was like, okay, here's a stupid guy that signed up. Here's another stupid guy that signed up. Only men signing up, of course. Wonder why. And then my co-founder, he is a little bit more extreme than me when it comes to trolling and pranking. We got invited to a lot of political debates, of course, as a newly started party that got a lot of attention. And he sent one of the people that joined to go as an official representative of the Same Democrats to an actual debate. And for me, it was just weird seeing this extreme right-wing guy sitting there talking about politics that we were laughing about and started this party. So after that, we kind of quit. But it's always fun to see this turn that happens that is really unexpected.
Well, it's because you're playing in those borders between what is true and what is fake, what is false. And I feel like there's one more question I need to ask you about the Church of Copyism, which is regarding its founder, Ibrahim Copyme Botani. He's never been seen, apparently, and he died in 2010. How much can you tell me about that individual, Peter?
Well, Ibi was not the founder of the church, really, but Ibi was a good friend and was a member of the Bureau for Piracy, and he's been like one of the key people that were kind of figuring out what the internet actually meant for society in Sweden. When he died, we actually closed down the Bureau for Piracy because it was felt it was time to to move on. But he was kind of the founder of the idea of Copy Me, was the playful thing of Copy Me instead of copyright. I'm not even sure he was super happy about the church, but of course he would have loved that something was copied and made into something else, which was kind of the idea of it. And that's kind of also the funny thing, like a lot of things happening in kind of our group, we don't agree to. We are not like in favor of those things, but they go hand in hand with the ethos of testing things and finding out what happens. And, people take credit for something which other people did. And it's kind of fine as long as it has a higher meaning and bigger perspective. And Ibi has been really, for me, an inspiration to all of these things as well. So I miss him, even though he could also be really hard working with. But he was just an amazing guy.
The only reason I asked, Peter, is because on researching the church, there was almost a suggestion in the press that because so much was fiction, that Ibi may have been a fictional individual in the first place. So that there was certainly a question of the fact that because there were no photos of him, or they couldn't find any photos of him, whether he was a fake identity. Again, I'm not sure how much you're able to share there.
I would say no comment on that.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there, and then to move on to some of the more serious implications of what you were doing at the Pirate Bay, because the reality was that there was a serious side to all of this. You were eventually wanted by Interpol, even though you still managed to evade Interpol's international arrest warrant for almost 2 to 3 years. I guess the first question I have is, how did you manage that for so long?
Well, it was really hard. I went to conferences speaking. I traveled all over the world at the same time. So the thing is, Interpol really suck, I have a big problem with that because I travel everywhere. I decided not to change my life because I wasn't wanted by Interpol. I just changed so that when I booked a ticket somewhere, I used my middle name as my last name. So it would still match the passport, but it wouldn't match the Interpol warrant because they didn't put my middle name in. So that's how easy it is to kind of bypass that. Also, to be totally honest, like I've been in, like, you have random traffic pullovers, like they just check people's identity card and driver's license. My face is the best get out of jail free card. So like I usually live in neighborhoods that are more multicultural, and whenever there's a police control, they see a white man and they would just like, oh yeah, you're the guy that we're just gonna let pass. So racism has worked great for me, which makes me really upset, of course. But it's been really, really annoying and also good at the same time to kind of mix it up with the Church of Copy Me and Interpol. And I did go to jail afterwards, after I ran for office and didn't get in. And in prison, they refused to give me vegan food, which I immediately found like something to complain about. And I didn't want to change my ideologies because of going to prison or being arrested or anything like that. So the first day I started a fight with them that they needed to give me vegan food. And I showed them the Swedish law about the right to have vegetarian food, and a dictionary of what vegetarian food means, that it means from vegetables. So they would give me lacto-ovo vegetarian food, so eggs and milk, and I don't eat that. So basically what I did is that I talked to my friends if they could update the Bible of the Church of Copymism so that everyone has to be vegan in that wording, vegan, not just vegetarian. And then they would fax actually the new Bible to the prison. And for religious reasons, I ended up having vegan food. So it was a really great kind of way for them to kind of circumvent the law or like the prison mentality so I've been probably the only person in Swedish prison that actually had the right to have vegan food. And then afterwards, people joined the Church of Copymism just to have vegan food as well.
Well, it seems like it was worthwhile starting an entire religion for dietary preferences, at least. But I mean, you ended up in prison for 6 months, and there are problems surrounding that court case. I mean, in a lot of cases, it's been looked at as a joke, the way in which you ended up in prison in the first place. So could you explain some of the circumstances that actually led to your imprisonment and how there was some trickiness with how that court case occurred?
Well, it's a long story, but in general, what happened is that the Hollywood movie studios and the music industry and all of these big Fortune 500 companies, they were really upset about us and not having control over the Pirate Bay and not getting us to listen or like dictate what we were doing. They, of course, went to the White House to ask them to put pressure on Sweden to close down this website. Mm-hmm. They invited the White House invited the Minister of Justice in Sweden over for a discussion about this case. He understood that if Sweden doesn't take down the Pirate Bay, the US will stop trading with Sweden and put the Sweden on trade sanction list, and then go to the World Trade Organization and ask for the same ban of Swedish goods being traded, which is it's like the nuclear bomb for kind of making a country comply, especially an ally that Sweden has been to the US, which is kind of outrageous and funny thinking about like how much they must have hated us. So the Minister of Justice came back to Sweden and he told the state prosecutor what the US has said. And basically, this is illegal in Sweden for a minister to tell a prosecutor or someone working for like an independent from the government what to focus on or who to charge or anything like that. So he said he just informed him of the problems of not charging us instead of telling him to charge us. He in turn talked to the prosecutor, who had just a few weeks before already looked into the case, came to the conclusion that we didn't break any laws. And just a few weeks after, there was a big raid against the Pirate Bay where they seized over 200 servers that didn't belong to the Pirate Bay. They had no clue what they were doing. They were just doing this because they had to do something drastically really quickly. So they arrested our lawyer. They took our mice and speakers, and they had no clue really. And then during a really long investigation, like what happened is, of course, that the MPAA sent out a press release before the raid even happened, which made it possible for people to download a backup of the site before it was actually raided. Interestingly enough, stupid of them, because otherwise there was no backup. And what happened later was that it took 3 days for Pirate Bay to get back up online and was not hosted in Sweden anymore. So I think Sweden felt like this is fine. We don't have to do anything. And we all had the feeling that they were going to let the investigation just die out because Sweden did what they needed to do for the US and so on. But instead, what happened is that after like 1.5 years of really slow investigation. The investigation started to take turn. Everyone was, it got sped up and everything had to be done immediately and so on. And the policeman in charge of the whole case went from being kind of a nice person to a stressed person that was really upset and really annoyed and wanted everything over with straight away. And it turned out that he also got a job from Warner Brothers and Universal during, he got a job offer that he said, like, when you're done with this investigation, come start working for us with a really high salary.
Wow.
And the day after he handed over the investigation, he got a job with the same organizations that were behind the lawsuit against us, working on the same case again. Like, he was actually working as a police officer on Friday, and on Monday he was working as, the head of anti-piracy in Europe against the Pirate Bay, with all of this information that had on a personal level about our whereabouts, our phone numbers, all of these things that he got as a police officer. It was a big scandal in Sweden, of course. People were really upset about this. Everyone except the new Minister of Justice. She said it was great that Sweden had such great police officers that even like these big companies wanted to employ them. And it didn't change the kind of court case because the judge decided this was not relevant. We also found out that the judge was the chairman of the Pro-Copyright Society of Sweden, funded by the music industry that sued us. And we, of course, filed complaints about him being biased, and his friend, who was the co-chair of the same organization, was the judge that actually took the case on to decide if he's biased or not. And they came to the conclusion that they aren't biased. They were just really the best people because they have so much knowledge about the copyright. So that's why they should test the case. So it was just scandal after scandal after scandal. Sweden was not prepared of the pressure that the US put on and the corruption that comes from these big corporations. Sweden has basically no laws against corruption on this level because it never happened before. So we did get convicted, mostly without any evidence. Like there were screenshots of these companies downloading from Pirate Bay, and on all of the screenshots it says that the Pirate Bay was actually not responsive. It said like different sites you download from, but when it came to actually the Pirate Bay, it says like it was offline because Pirate Bay didn't always work well, and when they did the screenshots, it was actually down for a few days. So they proved, according to like the evidence, that they downloaded from other places than the Pirate Bay, but still we got convicted of that because it was probable that they would have also been able to download that from Pirate Bay, which is a different thing than what was going on.
Ultimately, all of that led to you serving this 6-month jail sentence. And how did that change your outlook on the world? I mean, Peter, you certainly haven't lost your sense of humor. I'm glad of that. But did it certainly change how you thought about doing political activism in the world?
No, I think one of the things that happen when you go to prison for doing the right thing is that I wouldn't say that you get more radicalized, but you get more in tune with the understanding of what's wrong in society. It's like the people I met in prison were the people that would have benefited from a better society. They were like all the classical type of, having, a bad upbringing because, no parents involved because society didn't protect them enough. All of these things, which I believe is like how we should treat people better, and we would have less crime instead of putting people into prison longer or harder sentences. We should have better care and better safety nets for people in society. And I think most of my political convictions and ideologies were just proven in prison. I didn't have anything to feel ashamed for when I went to prison. I didn't do anything wrong. I wouldn't have changed anything. So I was kind of the sacrifice from the Swedish government to the United States government to keep on trading ABBA CDs and Volvo cars, So, and in general, I've gained a lot from doing what I do. I have a lot of people that are interesting that I get to talk to, like you, and then, a lot of other people that want to have me, around. And then, I meet people that I respect quite a lot all the time. I get a lot of things out of this as well. So I don't feel like, I lost anything really. Of course, being in prison is not funny, but I met people that I would never have met before, and I got a better understanding of a lot of these people. And I realized that the way I look at society and how to improve society is probably the best way forward as well. So it's a humbling experience in that way.
One of the most revealing things that you said about your prison experience is that it was more freeing than the internet. So, Peter, what do you mean by that?
Well, I don't remember, to be honest. It's 7 years ago, I think. No, but in many ways, prison has been, you get to think things, and it's not, you have your rights are very clear in prison. Then they're being violated against all the time, but at least you know what your rights are. With the internet, we're kind of confused about that. We don't really know what our rights are. We think we are allowed to do certain things, but we're not. And the prison is more straightforward. It's more, maybe it's because it's a much longer term institution, but the internet is, it's broken in much more many ways than the prison is, because the internet does not have, or like the current internet does not have any responsibility towards you. So in prison, at least, there is some sort of responsibility from the state and so on how you're being treated. But the internet is totally the opposite. So that is kind of scary. Also, it's a kind of detox from technology, which I think a lot of people would need today. So I think, in San Francisco, a lot of people just, maybe they should just go to prison for half a year instead of paying for detox for half a year or something,
Well, if Congress has its way, then we're going to see a lot of people from Silicon Valley in prison very, very soon. I mean, are you happy with how you managed to progress the debate and the public debate on copyright and freedom? If we fast forward to today, I mean, the entertainment industries reacted to what you were doing with the Pirate Bay in a really odd way. They ushered in, and it feels like you ushered in, the age of streaming. We have Netflix, we have Spotify, and others. I mean, they've really filled that void once inhabited by illegal file sharing services such as the Pirate Bay. I mean, even Warner Brothers is now releasing all of its content online due to COVID-19 through its own streaming service, HBO Max. So it feels like their response was, well, let's just make it really easy to stream things, and that way folks won't go and try and find it, quote unquote, illegally on the internet. So do you think that you've ushered in streaming? Do you think that's the right response that these companies should have had, or do you think something else should have happened?
I think the main problem with the streaming services, like, I of course know that because of Pirate Bay that happens. Spotify often says that without Pirate Bay there would be no Spotify, because of the void, the gap in between the kind of the parties, if you want to look at like Pirate Bay versus someone, even though I think it's basically capitalism versus some alternative form of society. But they often claim that, that they fill the void that we brought on. The problem for me is that, they want to thank me and thank the Pirate Bay and thank like the pirates for doing that, so that Spotify can exist and we have a better solution now. For me, it's the opposite. I think it's Spotify and Netflix and all of these, they've created a new cable TVs, which is against ideals that I wanted to have with the internet. I wanted to have free sharing. I didn't want to have, this and this package with these and these channels that we have to pay for and have different access depending on how much money we have. And another thing that I really object to is that previously, if you look at Spotify as an instance, previously the record companies had to pay for distribution and they had to like prepay for studio time and all of this. But as technology has progressed, there's no need for distribution anymore. It's zero cost. And studio time is basically, you can take an office and you put in some computers and then some soundproofing, and you can make one of the best tracks of the year for a really low cost. So you don't have these costs anymore that the record companies previously used to be like the venture capitalists for, but they still take the same amount of money as they did before with Spotify and iTunes and the streaming services. They also own part of them, and they have a deal with them that basically says that if they don't do exactly and pay as much as they want to, they would just cut the deal from Spotify or from anyone else and make their business defunct. We were on the verge of getting rid of them as middlemen, where you could have, rather, instead of having a gatekeeper that decided what music you can listen to or what kind of movies that would be promoted, all of these things, it would be something that we did as an audience together with artists. And we would get rid of the middleman, which is honestly, they're so rich and they're taking so much money, and that money should rather be the audiences or the artists' money. We don't have a need for these entities anymore. And Spotify has cemented that thing. So they have no more power than ever before, and they do less and get more money than ever before from these services. And then we're applauding them, saying like, hey, you solved kind of the situation. But in general, all of a sudden you're on Spotify and some of your tracks are not in your playlist anymore because Spotify lost some sort of deal with a record company, and you've lost your musical heritage, because music and this type of culture is not about money or licenses or fees or anything like that. It's human emotion and memories and connectivity and culture has a much higher value and meaning than just finance and business. And we could have gotten another route. We could have seen governments or countries coming up with better ideas of how to fund the arts, like a universal basic income would be one way, but we didn't even have this discussion whatsoever. We just said, like, here's a problem within the age of technology. The people that used to sell physical items are not going to be able to do that anymore. So we need to give them some sort of holy license to print money without doing anything in the future for historical reasons. And for me, that's just like, people used to sell ice in the streets. What if, we decided like, oh, now we're going to have a fridge. They're going to have 20% of all fridges, all of the income from fridges for the rest of their lives without doing anything. We would be outraged by that. But when it comes to these lobbying efforts that they've done, that they've been, really good at that. It's not something which is great for society. So if you look at the problems this creates, if you go to a country that is not, let's say, a Western world country, or not a country with a population that is in general middle class or richer, these companies are not going to spend time and such on getting market licenses for these countries. So I travel quite frequently to Kosovo and Brazil, and before COVID, obviously, and they still use file sharing because they are not first-class citizens according to these corporate entities. They're not wallets enough for them to actually come there and give them the streaming services, even though there's no technical reason not doing it. We have now, again, created a class system where the poor get less access to information and culture, and the rich get everything. And we don't think about the poor countries anymore because we're kind of done. So when you listen to music on Spotify, you don't share them on file sharing systems with people from countries that are not rich. And all of a sudden you created this class society that you're actually part of. So this is, even though we don't talk about file sharing or piracy that much in the Western world, it's the biggest thing in outside the Western world because it's the only thing. And that's extremely problematic.
I mean, this all comes back down to the thing that is fundamentally problematic about the internet in the 21st century, which is centralization. I mean, centralization of these services around certain stacks and large big tech services, it poses a massive danger, doesn't it? And Peter, how are you looking towards some of the ways in which we can start to decentralize the internet? Is it even possible in the 21st century? Are these big tech companies just too powerful and we've lost the internet? There's no way to repair it.
So no, definitely we lost it. We have no way of repairing it. We have ways of patching things a little bit, but it's going to be Band-Aid on an open cancer wound. That's kind of the situation we're at. That's something we're going to live with for the rest of our lives. Facebook and Google and these companies are so powerful that they don't really have to listen to politicians anymore. If the US would, even though they won't change their minds, like the new president Biden is one of the best friends of the MPAA. He loves these streaming services, and then maybe he doesn't like the big tech with Facebook and so on, but they're kind of the same crowd. If they would start being hard on them and deciding or saying like you can't have the user terms you have, you need to give out the information, ownership of the identities and so on to individuals, Facebook or Google, they would just leave and buy their own Caribbean nation. And that's, an option for them today. And they have much more money than these islands have. They have a turnover that's bigger than most countries' GDP. So we've gone to kind of super capitalism. So it's not a question about technology or decentralization. It's about ownership of identities, ownership of data, ownership of our cultural heritage, rather than a technological question. So a lot of people in kind of in my sphere, they're technologists and they have amazing solutions to all of these problems. But the problem is not that we're lacking technology to do decentralized services. Internet is a decentralized service that we've decided to remake into centralized service. So like everything that's based on, Facebook is using the decentralized technologies that we could use ourselves. We just decided that we're not going to run these nodes or software on our own machines. We're going to let some corporate entities do it, and they're really good at it. And what they're giving us is, something just the easiness of reaching each other. So we're not going to see any move over to decentralized services. Every time there's an issue with, Facebook censorship or some other censorship, people talk about decentralization being, and that they have the technology ready to do that, and they're super stoked about it. And I'm super happy that these people exist. But the problem is not one of technology; it's one of power. That's why Mark Zuckerberg is, invited to talk in these court cases and in front of the governments and so on, because he has more power than they do in most of these questions. So we're way beyond repairable situation. We can maybe start repairing some of that by, instating human rights in a digital form, like the ownership of identity should be definitely something we have. We need to force these corporations to be interoperable. But even if we did that, they have another advantage, and that is of money. So if you look at Google, they don't have competitors really, because they buy potential competitors. They spend a lot of money on doing that because they want the people that are potentially good employees, quality programmers and so on with good ideas. They would just want to employ them. And the troublesome thing is, like, when I talk to young people today, technologists that are doing startups and so on, their exit strategy, because they have one. Like, I've never had an exit strategy in my life when it comes to doing an organization. I've had like some sort of idea of why I wanted to do it, but many of them think that they need to have an exit strategy or, a 5-year plan and so on. The business world is like forcing them to have this. And most of them is like, yeah, in 5 years or 2 to 5 years, Google will buy us. That's an typical exit plan for a startup today, which is extremely worrying, because it's probably their best bet. Either that or Google does the same and make sure that they go bankrupt, because they have the eyeballs, the audience, and all of that every new organization would need. So I don't really see a way forward. The main problem here is, again, capitalism and the way the market is set up. And even though we do see like GameStop and all of these things happening, it's a small, annoyance on the big picture, which is not going to change. It's rather the opposite. It's being worse and more cemented into our foundation in every country in the world all the time.
The crazy thing is, Peter, you're mentioning there that Facebook or Google, they could just buy an island, and that seems very similar to the story you were telling me at the beginning of this podcast, where you were going to buy your own virtual countries. So the crazy thing is you were doing this a decade ago and it was considered illegal, but now these large big tech companies are doing it today, and it seems perfectly legal. And when we talk about decentralization and redesigning the internet, a lot of techno-optimists are quick to point to blockchain, and they go, look, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, they're going to help artists, they're going to help media creators. And do you believe that blockchain technology is the solution, or in actual fact, do you think, that's just another part of the problem here?
When you look at the financial side of blockchain, it is kind of a gamble. It's another capitalist system bringing another kind of asset into a marketplace. It's not what it was originally conceived as. We thought of it as some sort of like a decentralized anonymous payment system, even though Bitcoin not being anonymous, but it was a different way to kind of circumvent certain regulation that made it hard for activists specifically to deal with sharing money in a way that the governments couldn't intervene. Of course, this turned into becoming some sort of marketplace, which is extremely volatile and a little bit dangerous. So it doesn't fill a need for the everyday citizen. It doesn't fill, we don't have a money issue really. We have decentralized money right now. It's called cash. The problem is that that's being taken away. And of course, especially here in Scandinavia, but there's no interest in having decentralized money. We can see that people don't want to have cash. They want to have a credit card, and when they do, all of these systems, they don't want to run their own bank in their pocket either. So I think when it comes to NFT, it's not going to be something which is for every artist. It's going to be something which is going to work for artists that already have an audience, that are interested in technology or want to have, but it's not something which is good for like the general audience, or something which makes you reach a mass audience. Because if it's, about abundance, then internet is great. But if it's about scarcity, then that's not what the internet is made for. So then you have to like put scarcity on something. It's a virtual scarcity, which is kind of an obscene idea when it comes to information, I think. But I think the techno optimists looking at blockchain and on these technologies, they are not really into it for society's reason. Maybe some of them might be and have this almost religious fanatic view of these things fixing things. But then again, if you look at blockchain, what it really is, you can compare it to an Excel spreadsheet that if there's an update, you get the new version of the Excel spreadsheet, but it's extremely, extremely slow to update this spreadsheet of information. So it's not a good technology for doing a database that it's distributed. So yes, it can be good for certain things, but it's not this idea that we can solve it with blockchain. It's kind of the opposite. It's a very specialized technology that could be helpful in certain cases. But I don't think that, again, technology is not the solution to what technology fucked up. I think it's like, oh yeah, this building is on fire. Let's burn a little bit more and then it will stop being on fire. In the end, of course, everything will be burned down. And that's what we're looking at when it comes to the internet. Everything will be fucked up in the end because we're trying to fuck it up even more because it's fucked up. So I'm not very optimistic when it comes to these new technologies, and I'm not a techno optimist neither. I see that there is a major problem is that technologists, they don't get a education mostly in ethics or philosophy or anything like that in school. They are, basically lobbied by the big tech companies that, come work for us, and then they don't really see nothing bad with that. And it probably isn't bad on an individual level either. Like Google is probably really good for their employees, but it's not good that everyone starts working at Google either, right? So that's something we as a society need to take to deal with. It shouldn't just be up to Google to have that power.
I think the other problem is as the stakes increase, a lot of the folks at these tech companies seem to lose their sense of humor. That's why I love what you do, Peter, is you've kept that sense of humor, and that's the core of all the ways in which you're thinking about restructuring these things. And we're beginning to see attempts by folks like Tim Berners-Lee and Jimmy Wales to rebuild a web that we want and a web that we deserve. But do you think they're really going to be good solutions for building a solid, long-term, responsible sort of internet? Or, as you've just suggested there, should we burn the whole thing down and try and start again somehow?
I think we shouldn't burn it down because a lot of people depend upon it. That's the problematic thing. And we can't really build something new because you won't get people to move, and you will not solve it with new technology. One of the things that I loved being part of the Bureau for Piracy was that very often when we talked about things, it's like, here's a problem. We do not have a solution. We're not politicians. We don't have a solution to present. Here's a problem. Deal with it. Not everything can be solved. Not everything has to be solved. Not everything will be right in the future or even right now. We cannot solve every problem that we see. And the problem of the internet is one of those things that we will not be able to solve. We will maybe be able to mitigate some of it, but it will be like, I very often compare this to sexually transmitted diseases. Like we do now have AIDS. We will not be able to get rid of AIDS. We will have condoms or VPN or something in technical terms that will mitigate some of the problems that we have because of AIDS or NSA or all of these different acronyms. But we will never be rid of them, right? So we need to learn how to deal with them. We need to learn how to have as little impact as possible of the bad sides of this. But we still have people smoking to this day, even though we know it's an awful thing. And the way of getting rid of smoking is not by shaming people that you're a smoker. It's by, in the end, maybe making sure that tobacco has an incident and, the leaves die or something so that there's no more tobacco. I don't know, but it's not going to stop because we want it to stop. It's going to, maybe harm reduction is the right word I'm looking for. But that's also the beauty of being human. It's not that we are perfect individuals. We're not a perfect society. And that's we kind of need that kind of friction in order to maybe find alternative ways, alternative things to think about. We need to focus more on philosophy in general in society. I think a lot of people have been starting to understand that a little bit more when it comes to technology. And there are things to kind of build upon that is interesting. Just looking at like this, one of my favorite things that I discovered just like a decade ago is a discussion between Michel Foucault and Noam Chomsky in the 70s about the future and what it could look like and how it would be. They were describing a decentralized, distributed, federated network of humans, very much like the internet. And they had an idea of how it would be regulated. And if we had listened to the philosophy back then and taken that into context when building this new thing called the internet, it would have been very much better, of course. Of course, I think there will be something after the internet as well, just as there's always been something after that. But maybe we can learn from that. But it would not be in our lifetimes.
It does feel like if some of these tech CEOs just stayed in school, that we wouldn't have the problems that we have today. They should have gone to some philosophy classes instead of dropping out of Harvard and Stanford. I mean, Peter, you're still working in trying to make some of these changes through some new tech projects. And it's a miracle to some degree that the press still takes you seriously. They're never sure now whether you're trying to troll them or not. But you've looked at micropayments with Flattr and with your encrypted messaging platform Hemel.is. You're trying to get into the space that Signal are in at the moment, and most recently you're looking at how to do privacy oriented domain name registrars. So what are the challenges of some of these new projects, and why are they so important to you and to the future of the internet?
Every project that I start has been with a different approach that has values attached to it, not just some sort of business. So Flattr, for instance, is a micropayment system, as you said, that is looking at value in a different way than how much does an item cost. Because I don't think that you can actually put a price upon an individual song for a certain user, or like a blog post what it would be worth in terms of money, or a news article or something like that. I think with the internet, everything like that changed. And we need some sort of new technology that also acknowledges that change. And even though I worked on Flattr for over 10 years, and it later got sold to a company in Germany that runs Adblock, which would be a good fit if they ever make the necessary changes. I think for me, it's been somewhere between trying new technology for ideological reason, also finding new technology, because I'm a technologist at the core of it. So I like technology and working with technology. But the problem is I always end up in that situation where you say that people should stop taking me seriously or so on. But I do also have a serious side with everything I do. I do use pranking and trolling as a way of getting attention for my causes. And because it's fucking funny to have fun. But in general, I think I do have a certain different mindset than most of these organizations. That is more than just, how much money can I make from this? I think that in general, the audience, that they like what I'm doing and they want to be supportive of me. But my problem always gets to when you're in an organization, you have a great product and you talk to someone. I have my audience with me. I get enough attention to get it rolling. And then when I go to someone who I need to partner with because they have the big audience, let's say I wanted to have Flattr on YouTube, but they said like, great idea, we want to do it ourselves because our platform is so big. And then I'm cut out because I'm too small. Or the other day, I've been trying for a few years to become an ICANN registrar, accredited registrar with ICANN, which basically would allow me to sell the domain names like .com or .net and so on directly from those instead of having a middleman. And ICANN has, for the first time ever, banned one person for life. From what it seems, because of my political views. They just don't feel comfortable doing business with me. And the funny thing here is like, I want to get into that space because it's an important space, because domain names are basically our identities on the internet, and it controls everything. Everything you do is, first starts with a domain name. And ICANN says, I'm dangerous in that way, that I should not be able to work with them. A lot of ex-criminals are working in that industry. There's a lot of corrupt people in that industry. There are, old killers. There are elephant shooters. There's a lot of, people that have committed crimes. I'm the only one ever that's been banned for this in this way, because I have an agenda which is not good for them, which is I want decentralization. I want them to have less influence. Maybe the problem is that I'm too open with what I'm doing. And But I think that's also in the long run, it's what I'm supposed to do. Maybe it's my given task in this world is like you have a discussion between, here and here, and I want the discussion to move a little bit to the left. So I will stand, 200 meters away that way. And then someone else will come in and swoop and say, like, I'm this moderate person that are at the place where I wanted to move to. So maybe that's just my given role. I don't know. But I do have fun with what I'm doing, and people like what I'm doing, and I'm very open and honest with my ideals when I do things like this. And I think it's, I can wake up every morning and look myself in the mirror. And I don't think a lot of people in my industries can say the same. That is extremely valuable to me.
So if anyone's listened to this podcast and they want to get away from the keyboard, as you so wonderfully put it, and engage in more real life activism, where do you suggest they even start?
Like from a personal conviction, stop eating meat. That's the first step, because you get a lighter head, a better body, and less ashamed of your killing animal sides. No, but in general, I think it's what happened to me is that I think very often I've looked at myself and said, like, do I really think this? Why did I decide on thinking the things I do? Like meat, for instance, being one of those things. I did know in the back of my mind that, I never really ate the meat on the plate. It was just like I was brought up thinking dinner is a piece of meat with all of these things around, and I would always leave some of the meat because I didn't like it, and there was something in my body that said no. And I think a lot of things that we have learned, we need to unlearn, and it just has to be like, you have to find out who you are and why do you have the beliefs you do. And when you start looking at those beliefs, where they come from, they might mostly come from your parents or from your surroundings, not so much from your own convictions. And I think that is the first step, finding out who you are rather than what you want to be.
Well, Peter, you have such a wonderful story about how to engage in civil disobedience, and I hope that it's inspired some of our listeners today. And I just want to thank you for being on the Futures podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to Peter for showing us the importance of activism in a digital age. If you like what you've heard, then you can subscribe for our latest episode, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram @Futures Podcast. More episodes, transcripts, and show notes can be found at futurespodcast.net. Thank you for listening to the Futures Podcast.